shady politicians do shady things, right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess in a couple different ways. I mean, it sounds like either he did it, like you said himself, just allegedly. He either could have done it himself, or it could have been one of his workers. I didn't realize he was a business owner, but that gives him even more motive to protect himself, right? Because he could get sued into oblivion.
And we are live. Once again, this is the Solvable Mysteries Podcast, episode number 13. My name is Juras. I'm joined by my co-host, Glenn. How are you, man?
Hi, doing great. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. I'm definitely interested in discussing today's topic. So, without any further discussion, today we are talking about the disappearance of Ben Needham. So, as you can see from the picture, Ben Needham was a 1-year-old child who disappeared from the island of Kos in Greece. Right, so at the time of his disappearance, he was aged exactly 21 months of age, and after initial searches failed to locate him, he was believed to have been kidnapped. Despite numerous claims of sightings, his whereabouts remain unknown to this day, and his family members are still trying to locate his whereabouts as we speak. So this case garnered a lot of attention back in the 90s, even to this day in the UK especially. I believe like in the 90s, this is like the most famous missing child cases basically in the 90s for the UK. So I'm interested to see like Glenn, have you ever heard of this like case before like our initial research for this episode?
No, I came in totally just unaware of it. It's strange. I feel like I followed the news pretty closely during that period, so yeah, it's pretty weird.
I think
Don't remember that at all.
yeah, I think it was more like a UK thing, and obviously in Greece, this case also had a lot of attention as well. So, right, let me just quickly set the stage for what actually happened. So, from the picture that you are seeing right now, in the middle, we have Ben's mother. Her name was Carrie. So this is Carrie Needham, the mother. And then we have Ben's grandparents. So this is Christine Needham and this is Eddie Needham. And, you know, just to keep the initial story short, the grandparents of Ben, Eddie and Christine, they actually moved. Essentially, they moved to an island of Kos just for a brief, from what I've gathered, brief vacation. So, you know, Kos, an island that belongs to Greece, that it's right next to Turkey, is a popular destination for tourists all over Europe. You always hear about people going to the Kos island. It's a fairly small island. I would say it only has like a 30,000 population, so not a lot of inhabitants here. So essentially, so the grandparents go there for a brief vacation. They actually find the island really pleasing, and they sort of decide to move away from the UK from Sheffield. Sheffield is a fairly depressing city in the UK, at least compared to, you know, the beautiful island of Kos. I mean, you know, the scenery in Kos is fantastic. I don't have any Sheffield city pictures here, but no one took any.
Picture of it, right?
Yeah, there aren't any.
It's how bad it is. Poor Sheffield. We'll probably get hate mail now.
Of course,
from them.
but it is what it is. I bet people you know, feel the same way that live in Sheffield. So right, so a few months passes or something like that. The grandparents decide to make the move. I don't really know if they had owned property in the island of Kos or they bought it. Like, do you know like anything about like this part of the story? Like, did they actually own the land or did they buy land or something like that?
Yeah, I'm not sure because and sometimes some countries won't even let foreigners actually, like, you know what I mean, purchase something.
Yeah, like
without like also becoming a citizen or something.
We have that in Lithuania. So like foreigners are like restricted, but this was like a small piece of land. So I'm sure like in Europe you could freely buy land, at least like small portions. So they buy this land or somehow they acquired this land. I will show pictures later. They then sort of move in with their two sons because Eddie and Christine, they had two sons, Danny, who was 11 years of age, and Stephen Needham, who was 17 years of age. They move in to their new home in Kos Island. A few months passes. Carrie, the daughter of these guys right here, decides to move in as well because, as she stated, she didn't really have much of a social life back in Sheffield. She didn't have a job. She basically sort of her life in Sheffield was not pleasing her, and you know, she had this young boy Ben, you know, just sort of taking care of him, but not employed. So she decided to make the move as well. So right, so
you know, especially because you've done so much research on this. Was she basically a teenage mother?
Something like that. Like I can't like tell you on the spot like what her age is, but like she looks really young because, you know, she looks really young in these pictures. So she was probably fairly young.
Her parents look really young. Her parents look like they're my age. I'm like, well, I'm not, I mean, I'm joking a little bit, but her parents aren't that much older than me when I look at them here.
Yeah, well, this is like a picture from, I believe, like maybe late 90s or something like that. So yeah, this looks like, you know, maybe like right after the disappearance. So yeah, in a sense, I feel like she was like, you know, a really young child. I mean, a really young mother. And wait, let me just just to give our audience a little you know, a better picture, this is Simon Ward. He was the father of Ben Needham. So like it looks like a really young couple. This picture, I believe, is taken after Ben's disappearance because, you know, just from the way they are looking at the camera, it seems like, you know, it's some sort of a publication picture or something like that after the disappearance. So so these guys, you know, they look like fairly young, young parents. So anyways, Carrie decides to move in with her parents in Kos Island, and she starts a new life. She manages to land a job at a hotel near the house that she was staying at, and everything seemed fine for a while. You know, the family members, everyone involved, they seemed to like really enjoy themselves. Their life seemed really great in Kos Island for a while, but on the 24th of July 1991, everything just sort of gone to crap, I have to say. You know, I wanted to say another word, but like I didn't want to get demonetized anyway. So the thing is, on this day, right, just to give our audience a little bit of a you know, geographical understanding, Right. So essentially, what had happened is right. So it was a casual day for the family members. They were sort of, I believe, renovating the farmhouse where the family lived. So I have some pictures I will show later on of this particular farm house. We actually have a Google Street image as well. Right. So obviously, this is a picture from 2011. So this is like 20 years after the fact, but the house definitely didn't look like this. I've read that the house didn't have windows, the walls weren't made so nice. So essentially, it was a beat up house that they somehow acquired, and they were renovating this area right here. So so it was a casual day. Eddie and his eldest son Steven, they were renovating the house and sort of having a big family dinner, right? And so everyone was enjoying themselves. So this was like after like noon, like 2 p.m. around, somewhere like that, 2 p.m. They sort of noticed that their grandson Ben, who was in their care at the time, because Ben's mother was still at work at this hotel, they couldn't locate Ben at first. So so they just start searching the surrounding areas for Ben, but they can't really seem to find him. So initially, what the grandparents, Eddie and Christine, thought is that Steven, their oldest son, this is his picture like a few years after the fact, just took Ben somewhere with him on his motorbike that he owned at that time, and they didn't really think much of it. So 5 hours passed. They actually go and talk to Steven, and only then they actually realize that Steven is not with Ben, and Ben is actually missing. So I guess that is like the general situation of what happened. So I think you wanted to mention something, right, earlier. And we are sorry for the technical difficulties right now that we had, because the connection, all across like the Atlantic sometimes gets messed up. So, Glenn, you wanted to ask me something or anything like that?
Yeah. So I was just trying to picture in my mind. You got this family. It sounds like they're maybe a little bit lower income or lower middle class in terms of like what they can afford. Maybe the house you showed it looks pretty dismal with windows. So without windows, it doesn't really sound like a prime piece of land, but it makes sense. Like there's some fun place to go to.
This is like just like a sort of fits the theme of like Greece, right? So homes in like Southern Europe don't really look like, for say in America or anything like that. It's more like a style thing. So it's like
Makes sense. And then the grandparents look really young. Like I was saying, it seems like they had kids pretty early in life, and now they have a daughter who's also having a child early in life, to the point where like that kid is almost like they're young enough to almost be that kid's parents, the grandparents. So it's interesting. Like I think initially when I read about the case, I thought, so here's the thing that I guess we get into is like sort of the duty of care, and whether the people, the family, before whatever happened to this child happened, whether Ben was kidnapped or met some kind of unfortunate accident. The question is, what kind of childcare was going on in the house in that moment? I mean, it sounds like it was sort of a lapse. I think that's weird to me. But before we get into that, I guess, so okay, so this thing happens. You have these kind of visiting or now moved into the island British family, and their little toddler disappears. And is there any kind of indication of like what the sequence of events was after that? Like whether it was taken seriously right away, or whether it was sort of like, oh, he'll turn up
Yeah. So yeah, that's I think we will both agree that the weird part of this story is that the parents, I mean the grandparents of Ben, Christine and Eddie Needham, they actually took the situation quite nonchalant, I would say, because the thing is, they sort of assumed that Ben was with his uncle, their 17-year-old son at the time, Stephen Needham, and they sort of assumed that he had taken him, and so, right after they started searching the general vicinity of, the farmhouse that they were renovating, they sort of I don't know what they did for the next, like, how long could they have searched for him, like a half an hour, and
Yeah.
or like an hour tops. So that would mean for the next 4 hours they were, I definitely don't want to speak bad about them because I don't know the story, but from what I've gathered, it almost seems like they were just chilling out for like the next 4 hours, and they were like, he's probably, with Steven. And then they actually go to see Steven, and they realize that Steven has no idea where Ben is, and then they do the responsible thing. Then they go to the police and inform Carrie, their daughter, and the mother of Ben, that he's missing. So right,
It makes you wonder.
yeah.
So just to interrupt for a second.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, the way. So it's like, on one hand, it's frustrating because it's, when you and I were comparing notes and kind of reviewing ahead of the show, I mentioned the movie Mad Max, where from, I think the late 70s with Mel Gibson, there's a couple parts in the movie where, the main couple in the movie have a toddler, and the toddler's sort of just running around loose on like this farm, like near a road and, like near the woods and other places where like a kid could definitely run into some problems. And like, we laughed when we watched that. We're like, what parent does that? But then you review this case and it's like, well, what's going on here? Like it's strange. I almost wonder if when they had, because it sounds like they had 3 kids that were clustered kind of closely together, and maybe they were used to, by the time they had the last one, their youngest, maybe they were used to the older 2 just knowing to take care of the younger one, but then they thought it was the same situation now. But I think what they didn't understand is, and I'll just say this, I mean, it's the same for you, I'm sure you're us, like 17-year-old boys don't really want to take care of toddlers. It's not a good mix. It's sort of like in terms of temperament, and
Exactly.
17-year-old girls, yes, boys not so much. And maybe they
boy with a motorbike, by the way, who just took off on a motorbike. So
right.
Did they assume that this 17-year-old teenage boy just took this 1.5-year-old Ben, little Ben, on his motorbike for like a ride, whatever. like it almost seems like they really were like, I mean, to that point, these guys definitely don't seem like your typical straightforward family. They just move from your like hometown in the UK to like Greece. I mean, it's weird. It's weird, right?
So yeah, let me just chime in a little more on that then, because then that, now that you point that out, that's a really good point. It was actually better. It was actually acceptable in their minds that like there's a saying in the United States, give your son a motorcycle for his last birthday. Because it's not like a super safe way to travel. I understand mopeds might be a little bit safer, for sure.
Especially like in a place like Greece, like, especially in like an island like this, it would make sense. But I get,
but a toddler, right? A 21-year-old, like does that kid have a helmet? I'm sure Steven didn't have a helmet. So like how are you going to mount the kid? You know what I mean? Like all these logistical details that, like, especially here in the U.S. where we're in the EU, where everything is so safety minded. Like my child couldn't even ride in the front seat of our car until she was 8 years old by law in my state.
Same here. Same here in like my country, right?
So this is a time capsule, right? Because you're like, wow, in the 70s in Greece, especially, you could just, I guess, do anything. But maybe, or maybe this family was just out of, a little unsafe. But it is interesting. So it makes me think, once again, they might be coming from kind of urban or semi-urban, maybe, some of their ideas of acceptable parenting and safety for kids are a little strange. But I think maybe that's also the lapse in concentration, is they hadn't made that transition, and they were still thinking that like they had little kids that were taking care of other little kids. But like, yeah, a teenager who's basically leaving the house now is not going to want to take care of a toddler, and it doesn't sound like
that's a good point.
Yeah.
I didn't even like think of it from that point. I just thought that it was like really strange that they just sort of like I wish I did some more research, but like during my like research I couldn't find anything on like what they actually did during those like 5 hours. Maybe like some of our audience can like fill us in on this, but I have no idea like what were they doing for those 4 hours. Like I assume, like from what I've gathered, they just assumed that he was with Steven, but not even try to double check. I mean, once. I mean, it's it's like 91.
Do you think they were
so,
drinking?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I wondered. Do they think maybe that was like their...
I feel like they may have been drinking, because this is like Southern Europe, and in Southern Europe, it's like the dinner time or whatever. People usually drink wine or like are a lot more relaxed.
Yeah.
So this was definitely like a lot more like a relaxed scene, especially in Greece. Right, in Greece people are like really relaxed, so maybe they had some wine, but I don't know about that, because I didn't really find any information on this. But anyway, another thing is like, can you see the screen, Glenn? Because like
Yeah.
Okay, perfect, because we had those technical difficulties anyway. So yeah, so to this point, I don't know if they were drinking. that's my answer, right?
It just makes you wonder, like who could be that? I don't know. Like maybe this is just from people being too paranoid these days and over here. But I just, part of me is like, I mean, and mind you, like I grew up around the same period, so, or actually before this, so I remember being able to like ride my bike around my neighborhood and walk to places and things. Maybe it was a different time, but yeah, these seem like awfully young grandparents with an awfully young daughter to have to now be grandparents. Yeah, to have a child, so now they're grandparents, and now this doesn't really seem like they were in like let's raise a kid mode. It seems like they were in like we're gonna retire and drink all day in Greece mode. I don't know.
Yeah, it would seem like that. Anyways, another cool thing is that I just realized that the docks actually are fairly close to this island. So there's like this whole kidnap theory going around. So if someone was like, I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit later on in the show, but just in general, why would you kidnap a kid from a goddamn island? You know what I'm saying? Why would you kidnap a kid from an island that has the inhabitants of like 30,000? Like, just go somewhere. Makes no sense, but whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting part is like, on one hand, like the whole area for sure, going back to antiquity and probably before, has had a big problem with human trafficking. I mean, the Wikipedia on that stuff is fascinating, especially for that area. I mean, it used to be a point where there was a point where actually pirates and like kind of pirate kingdoms in that area would actually kidnap people from as far as Ireland. Back in like the 1700s and 1800s, there was I think when I did the research, there was an entire village one time that was taken as essentially slaves by some of the people in this area, south of here, and it did happen. So I guess I understand why people. There is, of course, human trafficking that really happens. But that being said, it looked like after this, basically any kid that was blonde that turned up in a group of people that was presumed to not have that gene,
they presumed that the kid was kidnapped, right?
Yeah. So that was the thing. So they said, okay, well, he must have been kidnapped. He couldn't have been, surely if there was an accident, someone would have told us. It seems to be kind of the assumption that no one would be so cold-hearted or craven as to hide the death of a toddler. But this is kind of interesting because it takes us full circle with the episode you and I did, Juras, about Michael Negrete at UCLA, where we had speculated about a scenario where somebody falls into like an open pit or some other kind of construction project, and
Yeah.
maybe the workers get there, and it doesn't have to be the boss. It could be just one of the workers really like, you know what, I don't want to lose my job or go to court or go to jail. Maybe we'll just pour concrete right now, and whatever's down there, let's not think about it.
Exactly right. So I think we're moving like towards like the actual theories than what actually happened. So I mean, essentially right after his disappearance, I think there are still some facts that we need to mention before we go into like the most recent theories that pardon me, that I personally believe are the most credible ones. I think we need to mention a few more details. So another interesting detail is there was this whole sort of I don't know how to put it, like a shabazz with like in between like the family members of Ben Needham and the Greece police, because the Greek police force essentially for the whole first week of Ben's disappearance, they actually suspected the family members of killing Ben. So that was interesting. Like the fact that the police force, the first thing that came into their mind was that the family did it, right? Don't you think that's a little bit like odd?
So it's weird because I just having read that John Douglas book, The Cases That Haunt Us, where he was talking about his involvement with John Bonet, he was criticizing, well, not really criticizing, he was noting that one of his colleagues came to this whole opposite, came to that same conclusion, that the family had killed John Bonet. So I think that in this case, it's because they're playing the odds. He called it playing the percentages. Yeah. That like, just because the fact that most children in a household are killed by either some kind of family member, whether it's a natural family member or a step family member.
Right.
It sounds like they were just like, maybe that's what happens there. Maybe like once in a while a kid turns up with a fractured skull, and it turns out the dad drinks every day and beats the family at night. And someone that turned up with it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean it would it would make sense, but then again, I've heard somewhere that police force usually, like, especially for like a missing persons cases, they at the same time they do like multiple investigations, right? So they investigate the family members, but at the same time they are investigating other theories as well. So right, so for the first week of investigations, the Needham family, like the grandparents, the police force essentially are questioning the Needhams thoroughly intense investigation for a whole week, and they pretty much come to the conclusion that the family was not involved. So after this 1 week of investigation, the police force decided to make a public statement that they are no longer pursuing the family members as main suspects anymore, and that the disappearance was not caused by the Needhams, neither by the grandparents nor by the kids of basically Eddie and Christine, who were Stephen and Danny. So I think to that end, I feel like I'm going along with the police, because it seemed like they went really hard on the Needhams for the first week, and they sort of decided to make this public statement that they are following other leads now into potential kidnappings. So I would, at this point, like, I'm ruling out the family members' involvement, because they seem really sincere, and like from the interviews that I've seen, like, I'm not going to be showing any clips here today. Maybe in post-production I will add some, but I'm not sure. From what I've gathered was that the family members really seem sorry for what happened, and almost like, dumbfounded. Like, so to me, it just, I'm getting the vibe that they're saying the truth, and like I'm personally this, like I'm not putting any blame on them. Like I just don't see any evidence to go that route. What are your opinions? Like,
yeah, I agree. It didn't really seem like there was anything pointing that direction. And then this is sort of like similar to the John Bonet thing, where there were a lot of accusations against the family, but in the aftermath, like, no bad thing ever happened that was connected to them again. So it's like, okay, well, what, like this family was this dysfunctional that they somehow killed the grandkid and then got perfect after that for the rest of their life.
Exactly. It doesn't really make much sense, and the fact that they continued the search into like the next few decades, and they sort of made multiple trips to like try to identify whether or not certain odd boy living with like an odd gypsy Romani family was their son, but their grandson. But that sort of leads us into the first, I guess, real credible theory of what actually happened to Ben Needham is that the fact that there were alleged sightings of Ben getting kidnapped on that day by Romani people, basically gypsies. The people who don't really know what Romani people are, so basically it's an ethnic group in Europe. They're like I don't really know like their lineage, but they sort of have like some sort of an Indian connection as well. Right. So as you can see from like the populations right here, you have some in the United States, in Turkey, around the general vicinity where the Kos Island is. It's like basically almost, really close to Turkey. So I'm trying to find Greece, right? So Greece has, I believe like 2.7% of Greece's population is basically Romani people. So there's like a lot of stigma considering the Romani people. They are known for committing petty crimes, usually like pickpocketing, I don't know, selling some sort of narcotics or something like that. But at least where I live, we haven't really heard of many like stories of Romani people actually kidnapping little kids. So that seems odd.
Yeah, it seems like a different, whatever the accusations are against this group of people, and kind of the complaints back and forth. It seems like a whole other level of like,
it's a serious crime, right?
It's almost like the most serious crime other than killing somebody, because you really are stealing someone's life, and it doesn't seem right. So it was interesting that like this happened a couple times where they're like, oh, look at that little blonde kid and a bunch of people that are not blonde. Maybe that's Ben in the years afterwards. But then they would go and do DNA testing on those individuals and like, oh no, that's their own family member.
Right. So the investigators were actually bothering like family members, like of random kids that just looked like different from their parents, essentially, around like that southern Eastern European area. And whenever like someone saw an odd like child, like a kid who doesn't look like their parents, essentially they sort of and if that person who saw that kid knew of this like Ben Needham case, they sort of just called up the police, like, I believe I know where Ben Needham is, and you need to come here and test the DNA of these kids. So there was a lot of like that weird sort of anti-Romani sort of agenda going on a little bit, right? Like, at least it seemed to me, especially in a place like Greece. I'm not sure if you know this, but like because you're from the US, but Greek people, they're quite nationalistic. They're really proud of like their history, and they really they're sort of like, at least from what I've gathered, they sort of don't necessarily like other people, other ethnicities that much. They have like that whole big feud with Turkey, for say, but that's like more political reasons. But it would seem that the Greek population, they don't necessarily like Romani people as well. So
just to jump into that, it's a good point, because it's interesting that it cuts both ways. What you said, I really appreciate that, because I don't really have insight into that. So it's interesting. On one hand, you could say that might be why the police were a little hasty to blame the family, other than the reasons we said that statistically it probably happens a lot.
Yeah.
But that they're like, oh, this weird British foreign family came here, and they like I don't really know why, they don't really get why they would come from the UK to there, and then
I mean,
the story.
I would get
not great, right?
Right, I would get why would they come into
Yeah.
here, right?
I mean, the pictures, but it is like a lower level of economic development. It's a country that had like a civil war and a bunch of other stuff.
Oh, yeah, it's problematic. It's definitely, especially
like,
in the early 90s. Yep.
It's like the same thing. Like for me, because some good portion of the family I married into, my in-laws, are in Belize, and it's really nice down there, but there's also other dangers. So yeah, it's a kind of, sometimes they offset, and there's tropical weather and things like that. So the thing I'm kind of wondering also is, on the other hand, so here just addressing what we're talking about with the kidnapping theory, it is interesting that it seems like almost universally, other than kind of the little slurs here and there against like Romani people and other groups where like a little blonde kid would turn up, and we'd all get a education in Mendelian genetics again, where it's like, oh no, that's a recessive gene that popped up because the whole area is so mixed with everybody intermarrying each other over thousands of years. It's interesting that almost universally the locals are like, you know what? We don't think it's human kidnapping. So that's where I'd like to talk to you about.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that they're just that confident that nobody ever comes and steals their children? Or is there a worry that if it was human trafficking, that's going to hurt your tourism because nobody wants to go to a place where they might get their baby stolen?
I mean, if this was just a case, like a random case that wasn't reported widely, then it wouldn't really make sense, that theory, because like no one's gonna find out either way. But since this was like such a huge case in the UK, it was like the most talked about child missing case in the 90s, I believe. So it could seem so that they sort of the police force, or like the politicians sort of gave the nod to the police force to like start denying the kidnap theory, because Greece wanted every single wealthy UK tourist they could get at that time, especially being somewhat of a developing country still. It would make sense. Like it would definitely make it would definitely sort of like bad reputation was definitely not what Greece was after, especially in the island of Kos. Like Greece has like many different islands, as you can see, but like this island right here, the island of Kos, is like one of the most famous ones for tourist attraction, just for tourism in general. So I'm definitely with you on this one. Like it would cause bad reputation, and I could definitely see the politicians sort of saying like, start denying the kidnap theory, like make Greece seem as safe as possible, right?
Yeah, that's what I really wonder. And then there was something else you said about the police that I guess as we segue into the next theory about what happened to him. So you said at one point, initially the police were like, oh, the family did it. And then all of a sudden they kind of flip-flopped and changed their minds. And I was wondering, as we get into the next theory, what happened. So I was wondering if maybe a local, because of course it's a small island, local police force knows everybody on the island, if maybe somebody informally told the police, hey, this kid that everyone's worried about, you don't need to worry about him so much because he had an accident, and we don't want to really like I know a guy who knows a guy, and I'm not going to tell you who it is, but just so you know, nobody was kidnapped and the family didn't beat him to death, but it's not good news.
Right.
What do you think about that?
I mean, right. So in a place like Kos, especially like since it's right. Let me just quickly jump to the Wikipedia real quick. So yeah, so as you can see, the place is it doesn't have a lot of inhabitants. It's only like 30 as of like 2011. It's like 30, a little bit over 30,000 people who live there. So back in '91, it was probably even a lot less because it's like I would assume it's a place where people move to live. Right, I think that's pretty safe to say. So it was probably even a lesser population back then. So people in areas in like small cities, they sort of know each other, right? So it could make sense that sort of word got around, and like maybe state officials got informed of what actually may have happened, that someone may know of a certain accident that sort of took place in '91 in regards to Ben Needham, and just let's try to cover up the accident. Like, it would make perfect sense, man. It makes sense to me, right?
Yeah, so along those lines, I think there was some actual finger pointing after somebody died. It sounds like there were some allegations that there was a construction job.
Right.
There was some construction work going on in the area.
Especially, I just want to like quickly jump in here, like for people who have been, looking at like these points that have marked on the map and looking at the digging site, like we are now referring to this area right here. So just to give some context, back in '91, especially on the same day that Ben actually went missing. So Ben went missing from like these two buildings right here. Like he was playing in around these two buildings right here on that afternoon, and in this area right here there were digging work done with like a big digging, like a truck or something like that. And yeah, so we will, I guess, since we're jumping into the most recent and I believe the most credible theory of what actually happened to Ben Needham, we'll be now referring to this area right here. So yeah, continue what you were saying.
Yeah, so I mean that already sounds like a pretty good plausible theory, right? So we know for sure that there was construction going on very, very close to the house.
Just around here, like I'm just quickly.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Right.
Because I think it makes it even more appalling to me that anybody was lax at all about taking care of this kid, because when you have a kid that age, they don't know how to protect themselves. They will walk into harm's way. And let me just get my soapbox for a second. In general, construction sites are dangerous. I mean, I've had a family member on at one of the places I lived, just trying to get through the construction site at night, fall down on her face.
Oh, wow. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, just an almost break her nose. And I'll tell you another time when I was working at Warner Brothers in the studios, or I was working in a studio a lot, and we were walking around as a group of us, and one of our group went to go walk kind of unauthorized onto a soundstage, literally as they were cutting down the roof. So there was literally like thousands of pounds of stuff that was just being cut loose, and this one of the crew guys stopped him, and 5 feet in front of him, the whole roof came down. So you can imagine, right? Like if you're someplace you're not supposed to be. Little kid walking around. There's some kind of confusion about who's watching him. He's 21 months old. Hey, cool machines and guys doing stuff and rocks and all kinds of cool stuff over here. Let's go take a look. And then, I don't know. What do you think happened to us?
I mean, yeah. So just I guess I have like my notes real quick. So just to give a little context, to like right. So essentially, what we are obviously leaning towards is the fact that a little 1.5-year-old kid unattended, wandering around right this area right here where you see like the farmhouse where the family stayed in '91. So this is like the house that we have showed on the Google Streets earlier. Right, so the kid was staying around here. Ben was playing around like this area, and the digging works were like being done really, really close to the area. So it sort of, and since Ben went missing, it would almost sort of indicate that Ben had ran into some sort of an accident at the digging site, right? So he could have been accidentally killed by a digging truck or some sort of digging machinery. Or then there's this other theory that maybe things were even more sinister that I've read and I've definitely heard some people claim that, especially given like the latest and greatest on this case, the latest I guess findings, they almost sort of indicate that even a more sinister events took place. So just to like give context to the whole story, right? I just want to quickly check my notes. So basically in October of 2012, the police from the United Kingdom actually traveled to Greece to search an area that they believed might contain Ben Needham's remains. So the British police force actually traveled to Greece, to the Kos Island, and they sort of, since they've heard about this theory, because someone that knew a certain digging truck driver sort of confessed to him that they actually killed Ben Needham. They sort of put that information out in the public, and the police force from the UK, they actually went and they decided to investigate. So they sort of initially believed that this general area that you are seeing right now in the Ghoul Streets is where they could actually find Ben's remains, because at that day of his disappearance, this area was being excavated. So on 19th of October 2012, Greek police also assisted the UK police force specialists, and they began examining the grounds where they believed Ben's body, his remains, could be found. So the operation involving geophysical survey equipment, forensic, archaeologists, and human remains detection dogs was triggered by a police line of inquiry into whether Ben had been accidentally buried as a result of an excavator driver dumping building rubble nearby. The operation did not detect any trace of the child. So in 2012, I feel like this is important to mention. In 2012, they didn't detect anything. They didn't detect neither Ben's remains nor any of his belongings, clothes, nothing. So 2012, the investigation was a flop, essentially. They didn't find anything. However, in 2016, the police force informed Carrie Needham, the mother of Ben, so basically they informed her in 2016 that they had learned that a man from Kos had said that Konstantinos Marquez, who is this man right here, I'll just quickly zoom out a little bit. So basically the police force informed that this man right here that you are seeing on the screen may have something to do with the disappearance of Ben, and they sort of stated that police began a search for remains in a different area from one search nearly 4 years earlier, and excavations were focused around a tree apparently planted since Ben vanished. A replica of the sandals he had been wearing was being made to see if they matched any found items, and the excavation work ended a few days later. More than 800 tons of soil had been dug up, with any items of interest sent back to the UK for forensic analysis. And essentially, to keep the story brief, or at least I want to just mention like the most important facts, in that same excavation sort of project, they actually found Ben's toy car that he had on that day, and also at the same time that toy, the soil found inside of that toy car had contained blood, and the blood was like a really small, I guess, pinch of blood or something like that. It was like a really small quantity of it, so they couldn't really match the DNA, I'm assuming, but what they could say that blood belonged to a human. So yeah, so this is where things really get interesting, right?
Yeah. I mean, it seems like a lot of arrows point in one direction. It's the only caveat I would say is the fact that this guy's dead, so he can't defend himself, and it does end up being kind of convenient if you follow the theory that, like, maybe the other theory that it was human trafficking and that nobody wants it to be human trafficking, so they'd rather just point in this direction. It does make sense, though, I guess, that if we were following this theory along that this guy did it or was involved, that he had gone and maybe accidentally dumped a bunch of dirt or something, or mashed over a kid and then covered it up initially, and then maybe got paranoid about it later and came and moved the body again. And maybe that's why we're not finding any remains, but we're finding like other pieces of evidence that look like something was there. Does that make sense?
Definitely makes sense, right? It would make sense because like everyone, at least in Cross Island, at least in whoever like lived around like that area, they all knew about this case. Like they had to know. It was publicly, it was like national news in Greece, so everyone knew what was actually happening. And another thing that I would like to quickly mention about this man Konstantinos, he actually made a interesting quote to the English I guess news publication. So in 2012, the Mirror tracked down Mr. Barkas, who confirmed he was excavating earth for a property to be built 50 yards from the house where the Needhams were staying. So, just like we've shown on the Google Maps. Speaking at the time in what was his first ever interview, he told us, "Yes, I was the man with the JCB that day. Loads of earth were being taken to clear the ground for the new house," right? So the most interesting, I guess, thing mentioned here was his next quote that states, "I think people were misled in thinking the child was abducted. Could there have been an accident? I don't think so, but no one really knows what happened. The little boy was 2 years old and the thorns in that field were as high as my waist," whatever that means. But I mean, sort of these statements sort of almost indicate that this man knew something more than the investigators did, don't you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it just seems like maybe he was trying to point the right way. I mean, if you put yourself in this place, if he did it, you're like, gosh, this horrible thing happened, and maybe I already messed up by not telling the truth, and now these parents and grandparents are hand wringing and feeling all this guilt already, and then they're always wondering, like, where is this child? And then on the other hand too, like here's the other set of victims are kind of these, like we mentioned, Romani families and other people in the area who are being wrongly accused of having a stolen child. I mean, their lives are being invaded too. It's almost like a very inordinate response in some ways, because like this little British kid is so important in the eyes of everyone there, maybe outsized to the other things going on to other people in the area, that they're kind of shaking down like all of Southern Europe to find this one child. And meanwhile this guy might be like, oh, all this is happening and I know the answer, but I can't say anything, or I'm going to be in a lot of trouble.
Another thing that I've came across during my research is that this man right here, Konstantinos Marquez, he actually was a successful businessman. So he was some sort of a construction project manager or something like that. Like he probably worked for himself. He probably was like using the excavator on his own. And the interesting part mentioned was that he actually knew everyone in Kos Island, so like he had connections all over the place. So right, so could it be the case that he maybe asked someone for help? You know what I'm saying? Like asked
Yeah.
someone to help cover up what actually happened. Because, I mean, if for say you have like some really shady politicians in Greece, and I'm sure you do, especially back in the early 90s, in a place like Kos, you probably those politicians were probably like, if they actually find out the truth, what actually happened, I feel like their main objective would be to cover up everything and to ensure that that sweet tourist money keeps on floating every year, right? That would make sense. Like they would definitely cover up if they're very shady, right? If they're like good people, then they would do the right thing. But shady politicians do shady things, right?
Yeah. I mean, I guess in a couple different ways. I mean, it sounds like either he did it, like you said, himself, just allegedly. He either could have done it himself, or it could have been one of his workers. I didn't realize he was a business owner, but that gives him even more motive to protect himself, right? Because he could get sued into oblivion. He could lose all of his assets. He's actually worth something to sue. Yeah, so that from that perspective, but I could also see, like you said, because he knew everybody, because he was so connected, maybe out of like just the concern for the truth, as he's sort of in his twilight days, he's talking to the cops and he's like, look, like, let's just have an agreement. After I die, like, go open this envelope and look in the place it tells you to look. Maybe something like that. Maybe he left a little time capsule,
Right.
He's like,
I mean, looking at this guy right here, he doesn't seem like he would. he doesn't seem like he's the type of guy to like leave riddles behind. He seems like he's a straight up, straightforward guy. So, by the way, he is. I believe you've mentioned before, but like we can't really like do anything about him or investigate him any further because he had died from stomach cancer back in, I don't know, I can't remember, like 2015 or something like that, 2016 maybe. So right, so it's not like, so at this point I believe he's the main suspect, at least in my eyes. And also the British investigators, they also stated that they believe that this man had killed Ben Needham either by accident or by some even more sinister way, for say. But another interesting fact, I guess, because we have to sort of in this guy's defense, his son actually made a few statements as well. So the son of the digger driver implicated over the death of Ben Needham on Kos says there is no evidence his father killed the Sheffield toddler and covered it up. In his first television interview with Greek media, Valantis Barkas also claimed South Yorkshire police had apologized for the trouble his family had been put through after the allegations about his father, Konstantinos, became public. So, I mean, I don't know how credible this statement right here is, that he claimed that the police force had apologized for the trouble, because I couldn't really find any sort of apology or anything like that. But maybe it was a personal apology or something like that.
Officer Smith said, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but like, I mean, in this guy's defense, we have to mention that because I mean, since there's no like remains found or anything like that, like if in 2016, if they hadn't located the toy car that belonged to Ben in the digging site, then I wouldn't be sure. I wouldn't be like sure of what actually happened. I'm not sure even as we speak, but it just seems that the obvious, the evidence points to this guy right here, right?
What do you think about that? I mean, that's let me play devil before we're almost wrap this up. But just to play devil's advocate, I mean, sometimes I wonder when they find stuff like that, because I feel like there's like a confirmation bias. Sometimes when people, when like searchers, let's say, not us, but like the people actually gathering the evidence, sometimes they're like, oh, look, there's a toy and that was a special. Like I always wonder whenever they're like, wow, you guys remember all that time ago that was his special little car, like that. You know what I mean? It's been a pretty long time now. It's been 20 years, and it's like, are you sure it wasn't some other little kid in the area's car? And then I guess the other thing that bothers me is for them to say that. I would really want them to take that car and match up, whatever little numbers and markings that are on it to like, oh yeah, that actually was like a car that was, made in, I don't know, some other country and shipped to the United Kingdom, and then, you know what I mean, and never was sold here locally in Greek shops to other Greek little children. I don't know.
I mean,
that's kind of devil's advocate on that.
I mean, I think we have to do that because still, like, besides that truck and the fact that this guy was excavating the site on the day of, on the day of Ben's disappearance, I think these are like the only pieces of evidence that we have. So it's that I would definitely not consider this evidence concrete evidence, right? So they sort of indicate towards a certain outcome, but they definitely don't prove that certain outcome. So who knows what actually happened? Like, once again, like I personally am completely discrediting the fact that the family members had something to do with it. Also, the abduction by specifically Romani people for some reason. You know what I'm saying? Like, I wonder why did the Romani people got like so singled out here, but I guess whatever.
Yeah.
That just seemed like a little bit like some sort of like prejudice, like a touch of that, right? So it seemed to me, but who knows, like I'm also discrediting that, and the only other viable sort of case, theory is that Konstantinos Marquez accidentally killed Ben when Ben was just sort of strolling about, playing with his like toy cars. He may have seen that big excavator that Konstantinos was driving. He got interested, and he sort of ran into an accident, because that sounds like an accident to that sounds like how an accident would occur, right? So
yeah, I mean, we see so many videos, now that there's video cameras everywhere, we see so many videos where like that exactly happens, like some toddler exactly Ben's age. I see it all the time in videos from like big cities. The kid will just stroll right into the street and get nailed by a car, or get backed over by something. It happens. It's one of those things. I think maybe that's the flavor of this episode, is sometimes bad things happen to good people, and sometimes those bad things happen because the good people weren't totally doing their job, which is kind of my feeling here. Like there was a little bit of a mix-up about who was watching our little toddler. But that being said, I think it's a leap to suddenly attribute it to kidnapping in this case, when it doesn't really, there doesn't seem to be any kind of motive. Yeah, I mean,
any evidence, like some sightings that the credibility of those sightings, who knows,
yeah. And these people never were in trouble for anything else. These people, it doesn't look like we ever had any kind of domestic violence incidents in their house where you think, oh, well, maybe they could have thrashed a kid. It just seems so likely. I mean, 50 yards is nothing. 50 yards away for a construction site, they should have never let that kid outside while that was going on, or not alone. So yeah, I mean, that just seems like an accident waiting to happen, and I think it did.
Right. So I have to definitely agree with you on this one. So I guess this has been at around that hour mark, that sweet spot for us right now. So I guess we'll be wrapping up episode 13. Anything you want to mention to our audience before we sign out?
No, that's it. I mean, thank you for listening. We're really excited to see our growing audience and our growing number of subscribers. We hope to have a very exciting additional episode ready at the end of this week as well, and I think you'll also find that exciting. I think that's this one. Actually, the next one, I'm really curious to see what your take is, Juras, on it, because it seems like it's been pretty controversial, just like this one in some ways.
Exactly right. Yeah, the next one is definitely an episode that has a lot of crazy details, but I guess we'll leave that for the next show. So yeah, this has been episode number 13. As usual, guys, leave a comment if you think we have missed something, or leave your just general theories in the comment section below. And yeah, I guess we will catch you on episode number 14. Definitely catch us then, because we will have a very, very interesting case to discuss. And right, as usual, guys, stay safe, and we'll see you, this week. By the end of this week, we will see you on episode 14. Peace out, guys. Stay safe.